All right, so for today's video, we're going to be talking about Premier Danielle Smith again because she was just in Ottawa as she wants to open an Alberta office in Ottawa and kind of be able to run some things from there. Now, she came to talk about, a whole host of things. She got a lot of pushback on her whole transgender, gender-affirming care policies that a lot of people are up in arms about. But what I want to touch on today is again her targeting Steven Guilbeault when she was on CTV while talking to Vashi, who I think is a great interviewer. And I want you to listen to what she says about Steven Guilbeault and also just kind of her level-headed approach and just honesty in terms of working with people instead of just trying to run it the way you want to run it.
You said something really interesting in your press conference today that I wanted to pick up on. You basically said Steven Guilbeault is an ideologue. I get along with the Minister of Industry. We get along really well, but I don't with Steven Guilbeault. Right. And you kind of intimated that you want him out. Has anyone in the federal government ever sort of insinuated to you that that is a possibility? You're not the only premier to kind of muse about his prospects.
Look, I had hoped that I'd be able to find some common ground with Minister Guilbeault. It's why I agreed and actually suggested that we put together a table so that we could work through these issues and see if we could get to a target of 2050, which is our target in Alberta. We think we can be carbon neutral by 2050. We're already making some great strides on building a hydrogen economy. We've had partnerships with the federal government, with Air Products Hydrogen Net Zero Project, Dow Chemical Net Zero Petrochemical Project, as well as Heidelberg's Net Zero Cement Project. And so we're going to continue working on those things. We also have a working group to talk about small modular nuclear and if we'll be able to roll that out. Capital Power has indicated they want to do that. So I would say that there's lots of common ground. And as we've been going through this process, we've seen that the federal government has lost a number of court cases. They lost on the Impact Assessment Act. They lost on the plastics ruling. They lost on the Emergencies Act, all pretty well at the root of the same root problem, going beyond their authority. And the problem that we have is that as we've been having this discussion, Steven Guilbeault has acted like none of that's happened. He's announced an emissions cap on oil and gas. He's announcing emissions caps on methane. He wants to get to net zero on a power grid that's also outside the Constitution. He wants to phase out combustion engine vehicles. That is not collaborative federalism. If anything, he should go and look at what the court said. Collaborative federalism means you cannot legislate in another area of jurisdiction that is not your own. You have to negotiate these things. He doesn't do that. And so because he's acting in the way he is, in a lawless way, unconstitutional way, I think it's pretty clear that the relationships broke down with him, and I would like to see him removed, yes.
Now, listening to her, it makes you wonder, why do I not live in Alberta with a level-headed person that's in power? But yeah, what she's saying is great. You need to be listening to experts. You need to be working with experts. And I remember a video I came across when the U.S. Senate was talking about California rolling into a zero emissions, electric only vehicles, which then they had problems with the power grids. But they actually called into a gentleman who owns his own transportation company, and he came out and told them, like, we would love to have EV trucks, but it's not feasible, and you guys can't even handle like electric vehicles for the power grid. Now you want to introduce electric trucks for, goods and services. Like, it's just not tenable and it doesn't make sense. And you guys need to rely still on fuel and diesel, keep things running for the population until you can get to a proper solution with this. And these are the things that I think Steven needs to listen to. And I'm going to play a bit of that, what that gentleman was saying here.
While we share the passion for EVs and cars and light-duty vehicles, projecting an automotive construct onto trucking industry dynamics is a massive mistake. And let me be clear, if battery electric trucks had adequate range, there was adequate charging infrastructure, and utilities could deliver the power, we truckers would be delighted. But let me explain our reality. Today, a clean diesel truck can spend 15 minutes fueling anywhere in the country and then have a range of about 1,200 miles before fueling again. In contrast, today's long-haul battery electric trucks have a range of about 150 to maybe 330 miles and can take up to 10 hours to charge. So for the same 1,200-mile journey, we'd go from 15 minutes of fueling a clean diesel truck once to charging today's BEV 4 to 8 times for dozens and dozens of hours. And this is assuming there are chargers where you need them. We would need far more trucks to haul the same amount of freight, and each of those trucks would cost 2 to 3 times a comparable diesel truck. Converting the U.S. fleet of Class 8 trucks to battery electric would require a $1 trillion investment, which ultimately would flow to consumers. We welcome the opportunity to provide real-world, factual, and constructive input into the legislative and rulemaking process. We recognize that most people don't understand how the trucking industry works behind the scenes to supply the American public. But we can't allow unrealistic timelines, a state patchwork, and technically unachievable regulations to set trucking up for failure. Remember, we deliver food, medicine, baby formula. Failure is not merely inconvenient, it's catastrophic.
And again, this is not rocket science, but to have the environmental minister that we have not realize that these are not tenable things, they just sound like nice things. Renewable energy, again, wind, solar, hydroelectric, that's all great. But as you could hear from Danielle Smith, she's already in the process of working with different companies to get to a potential net zero in terms of the carbon. But as the interview goes on, I want you to listen to this next part about the power grid.
On the idea of it being lawless, they would contend, and they would point to that it isn't, and they would point to another Supreme Court decision, and that is around the carbon price as informing their ability to do things like set an emissions cap or set out an net zero electricity grid by 2050, because it involves the imperative of mitigating climate change. Have you received legal opinions that do show that the federal minister and the federal government are acting as you have characterized them lawlessly in pursuing, for example, the emissions cap?
Yep. I would tell you that the court decision on the carbon tax was a very narrow decision. And they actually do say that in the judgment, that it applies to this particular regulatory framework and should not be taken to apply to other regulatory schemes. And so I would say that the most recent decisions of the Supreme Court saying, stay in your own lane. The federal government has its areas of jurisdiction. We have ours. There are areas of overlap where we have to engage in cooperative federalism. The principal word there is cooperative, and I don't see much cooperation coming from the department of Steven Guilbeault.
Do you have signs from any other ministers who you said today, hey, there's some that I do get along with? Anything behind the scenes ever communicated to you that they are willing to be more bendable on some of those targets than the environmental minister has indicated?
Well, I would hope that they would now understand that they've got to have a balance, that emissions reduction is important. We think it's important. That's why we set a 2050 target, and we've partnered with a variety of companies on a pathway to net zero, including our oil sands producers with their Pathways project. But we also know that reliability is important. We almost had our power grid fail a couple of weeks ago, and we've had 14 near misses in the last 18 months. We have to keep the lights on, because if you don't have the lights on and the furnace working in minus 35 weather in Alberta, people will die.
And I'm going to go back to this gentleman that I just showed you, because again, he makes a very solid point on that as well.
Mr. Boyle, we acknowledge they're heavier. We acknowledge they're more expensive. Maybe the incentives don't even cover the excise tax. What does it cost to insure a vehicle like a large truck that has these extra costs and weights and an infrastructure, frankly, not designed for 5,000 more pounds per axle and those kinds of?
Right, sir. Yes, it's hard to tell because we're so the consumer-oriented, the consumer-facing EV product is so much further ahead, right? Mm-hmm. We're talking about a very heavy-duty, under high-stress, corrosive environment. Just so we're clear on the scale of the issue, each electric vehicle battery for a heavy-duty truck weighs 8,000 pounds, and you need at least 2 of them. So we're talking the weight of 4 or 5 cars. And my friends and peers in the industry nationwide who have tried to make efforts to put in, say, hey, I'm going to convert a dozen forklifts to electric, or I want to tee up a facility for 30 electric trucks. There's no power. The utilities come back, the cities come back and say, is this some kind of joke? One friend tried to put in Illinois a facility, tee it up for 30 trucks electrification. The city came back and said, this is some kind of joke. You're asking for more draw than the entire city requires. And just to give you an idea, 30, 50 trucks, that's like a 5-6 megawatt application. The factory that makes the trucks is a 2 megawatt factory. So We're playing checkers right now, and we'd be delighted to have more choices. If the power and infrastructure is not available, it's not even a consideration for trucking. What are we talking about here? We're trying to serve the country and supply commodities that are essential to everyday life. So before any of this is not kind of a choice. We have the cart before the horse right now.
And I love here how we have two level-headed people in two different places. California, super, super hot. Alberta can get very, very cold. And they're both talking about issues with the power grid involving EV, electric only, this renewable energy. The environmental minister does not understand how things work clearly in terms of just rolling out these grand ideas as he has. And yeah, I think Danielle Smith has a great point that he's lawless. He's just doing whatever he wants, not actually listening to anybody, even though he thinks he's, an expert on this. And it'll cause a lot of issues. And she ends off the interview here by talking about just the liberals and how they're doing very poorly because of this and a combination of other things.
And then we also have to deal with affordability. And I would argue that part of the Liberals' current trouble in the polls is that all of these decisions that have been made have been layering on the costs on everyday families and is creating an affordability crisis. All three of those things have to be dealt with at the same time. And that's what we're trying to propose, is a very pragmatic, reasonable approach that balances those. And I would hope that they would do the same thing.
Now, as I said, she really makes me want to move to Alberta. She's awesome. But I want to hear from you guys. I know I've been seeing a lot more Albertans in my comment section, so welcome. Let me know what you guys think about this whole Steven Guilbeault and what she had to say about it. And as always, I will catch you guys on the next one. Thanks so much.